not least of all the Mon music. Continuity. We have to shift the way we support my role. I have a roles in music. The regiment was the original protection. What goes on behind the palace walls is rarely seen openly. But this time, an internal power play has triggered a dynamic that is exceptional even for an institution like the British monarchy. According to consistent internal signals, Princess An-Noor has become the central figure in a decision considered a silent escalation. Queen Camilla has been effectively excluded from preparations for Prince William's future coronation. No official decree, no public statement, yet a step with enormous implications. What might initially appear to be an organizational detail, music, is understood within the court as a clear show of force. Planning documents, internal briefings, and strategic coordination regarding the coronation circulated for weeks without the Queen Consort's involvement. In a music system where visibility is synonymous with influence, absence means more than just a formal oversight. It is a signal, and this signal was clearly sent deliberately. The process is considered a taboo-breaking act because it calls into question a fundamental assumption of modern monarchy, the notion of unified loyalty at the top. The coronation of a future monarch is traditionally a process that involves all high-ranking members, especially those who represent the reigning king. The fact that Queen Camilla is excluded from this circle points to a profound internal conflict that can no longer be concealed. Observers within the palace speak of a strategic reorganization. Princess Anne, known for decades as a disciplined guardian of monarchical principles, is said to have used her authority to establish a clearly defined planning circle. This circle is not guided by symbolic titles, but by functional loyalty to the next generation. The focus is clearly on Prince William, not on the current constellation, but on the one to come. The precision with which this exclusion was implemented is striking. There was no external confrontation, no visible friction. Instead, the structure was quietly altered. Invitations were omitted, votes were held, and decisions were made without the participation of the Queen Consort. Decision-making processes were redefined. Within a few days, a new reality emerged, which was only recognized much later by Camilla's inner circle. This approach makes it clear that this was not an oversight or a short-term falling out. Rather, everything points to a planned boundary setting. In the logic of the court, this means that someone has decided who belongs to the future and who does not. The fact that this decision originated with Princess Anne lends it additional weight. She is not considered impulsive, but rather calculating and principled. This move also raises questions about the internal stability of the monarchy. When even key figures at the top act separately, it reveals a structural tension. Prince William's coronation thus becomes not just a ceremonial event, but a power play in which control, influence, and legitimacy are renegotiated. The fact that Queen Camilla's exclusion is not publicly explained is particularly significant. This silence forces observers and the public to interpret the situation. Is it a protective mechanism for Prince William? Is it a correction of past power shifts or the beginning of a conscious distancing from figures seen as part of the past? The first stone has been laid. Princess Anne's decision does not mark an endpoint, but rather the beginning of a development that could fundamentally change the monarchy's self-image. If even the preparations for the next coronation are accompanied by internal rifts, a central question arises. Is this a one-off power play or the beginning of a fundamental reorganization of the crown? Behind the current power struggle lies not a spontaneous impulse, but a conflict that has been building for years. Within the monarchy, it has long been an open secret that Princess Anne and Queen Camilla never developed a relationship of trust. While polite distance was maintained outwardly, behind the scenes two fundamentally different understandings of what rank, duty, and legitimacy should mean clash. The now visible exclusion is therefore less the trigger than the result of a long-simmering structural conflict. Princess Anne represents a monarchy defined by years of service, restraint, and clear hierarchies. Her role was never built through public spectacle, but rather through reliability and institutional continuity. In this logic, what matters is not who is in the limelight, but who keeps the system stable. Queen Camilla's rise, on the other hand, was perceived by many as the result of political rehabilitation and media normalization. From Princess Anne's perspective, this was precisely where the problem lay: influence without a classically established path of legitimacy. This difference became particularly evident when Queen Camilla increasingly asserted her presence after King Charles's accession to the throne. Public appearances, symbolic initiatives, and greater involvement in representative processes caused internal unease. For Princess Anne, this blurred a crucial boundary: the distinction between a supporting role and shaping power. In a system based on clear responsibilities, any expansion of influence is perceived as a potential disruption. Several internal situations reinforced this perception. At protocol occasions, there have been repeated instances of overlapping duties, with Queen Camilla assuming responsibilities not traditionally attributed to her position. Such moments may appear insignificant to outsiders, but within the court, they are seen as indicators of shifting power. Princess Anne, known for her sensitivity to such signals, interpreted this development as a gradual redefinition of monarchical roles. The conflict is therefore less personal than structural. It is not a matter of sympathy or antipathy, but rather how authority is generated within the crown. For Princess Anne, authority is the result of discretion and institutional acceptance. For Queen Camilla, it has increasingly been defined by visibility and proximity to the reigning monarch. These two models are difficult to reconcile. Furthermore, there is another aspect: the perspective on the future. Princess Anne consistently thinks in terms of generations. Every decision is measured by its impact on the next reign. In this mindset, anything that dilutes the clear positioning of the future monarch is seen as a risk. Queen Camilla's growing presence was therefore perceived not as a compliment, but as potential competition to the future authority. Within the court, this attitude led to a quiet division. While some sought to create balance, Princess Anne's position gained increasing traction. For many, she embodied the familiar principle of order during a period of change. Her skepticism regarding Camilla's role was not openly discussed internally, but was increasingly shared. Thus, the center of power gradually shifted away from formal titles and toward de facto influence. Against this backdrop, the current exclusion from the coronation preparations is not an isolated act, but a logical consequence. It marks the point at which the latent conflict was no longer managed, but resolved. Princess Anne drew a line based on years of observation, assessment, and internal warnings. For her, the moment had come to establish clarity before the next phase of the monarchy began. This development raises a crucial question: how many such simmering conflicts still exist within the crown without being visible, and is the current rift merely the first to surface, while others are already operating beneath the surface? While the conflict between Princess Anne and Queen Camilla festered in the background for years, another figure increasingly moved to the center of the internal dynamics surrounding Prince William. Within the palace, it has long been an open secret that the heir to the throne no longer sees his role as purely representative. Rather, he is increasingly perceived as an active shaper, willing to set boundaries before others do. It was precisely this attitude that made him a key figure in the decision to exclude Queen Camilla from the coronation planning. In recent years, Prince William has systematically prepared for his future role. Observers report a growing involvement in strategic issues that were previously reserved exclusively for the reigning monarch or their inner circle. This involved not only dates and symbolism, but also long-term direction, public perception, and institutional stability. This process made it clear that William had developed a distinct vision of what his reign should look like and what influences he was willing to allow. A central issue was the question of boundaries. Within the monarchy, there is a traditional, unspoken rule that the future authority must be protected early on. Anyone who gets too close to this core risks being perceived as a disruptive element. Queen Camilla's growing presence in symbolically sensitive areas fell precisely into this category. For Prince William, this did not create a personal conflict, but rather a structural problem. Internally, it was increasingly recognized that Camilla's influence was no longer solely tied to King Charles's reign, but extended into areas that already affected the next generation. In a system based on clear transitions, this is a delicate moment. Prince William is said to have recognized that early clarification was necessary to avoid later power struggles. This realization led to a significant realignment of his inner circle. Princess Anne played a crucial role in this. As an experienced figure and trusted advisor, she supported the line increasingly taken by Prince William. Both shared the conviction that coronation preparations had to be kept strictly separate, not only organizationally but also symbolically. The coronation should send an unambiguous signal of a new beginning, unhindered by existing claims to power. In this context, the decision was made to restrict the planning to a very limited circle. This circle was not based on current titles but on the future structure of the monarchy. Queen Camilla no longer fit into this concept. Her role remained formally unchanged. In practice, however, her influence on shaping the course of the coming reign was diminished. The consistency with which Prince William pursued this course is remarkable. There were no half-hearted compromises, no symbolic concessions. Instead, he opted for a clear, albeit quiet, approach. Within the palace, this was understood as a signal. The future monarch is prepared to assume responsibility, even if this creates tension. This stance noticeably altered the power structure. While mediation had previously been favored, an approach focused on clarity now took center stage. Prince William thus positioned himself not only in relation to Queen Camilla, but also to the entire court. He made it clear that his position would not arise from the continuation of existing arrangements, but from a conscious redefinition. This move had far-reaching consequences. Internally, it was interpreted as the beginning of a new phase in which the heir to the throne no longer waits, but acts. For many observers, this is an indication that the monarchy is facing profound change, a change characterized less by tradition than by strategic self-assertion. The crucial question, however, remains open. Will this clear line contribute to long-term stabilization, or does it threaten to further exacerbate existing tensions and open new fronts within the crown? Queen Camilla's exclusion from the coronation preparations did not go unnoticed. Within a few days, her position within the internal power structure changed noticeably. What had previously been considered a secure position at the monarch's side suddenly appeared fragile. In an institution where proximity to decision-making processes determines actual influence, her exclusion amounted to a gradual disempowerment. Initially, attempts were made to interpret the process as an organizational restructuring. But the longer Queen Camilla's absence from key votes lasted, the clearer the signal became. She was no longer part of the strategic core shaping the future of the monarchy. This realization caught not only her but also those around her off guard. Within her staff, concern grew that this was more than a temporary measure. The loss of power was less evident in public appearances than in internal processes. Decision-making channels that had previously passed through Camilla's office were rerouted. Votes were taken without her participation. Everything remained formally correct. Politically, however, the balance of power shifted significantly. For observers within the court, this was a classic pattern of influence not being withdrawn. It is withdrawn by no longer being needed. This development also had symbolic implications. The role of the queen consort thrives on visibility and relevance. If both are diminished, a vacuum is created that is difficult to fill. This very vacuum has now become visible. Camilla's presence remained, but she appeared increasingly detached from the crucial decisions being made. The court system, known for its quiet but effective mechanisms, had marginalized her without triggering an open conflict. Within the monarchy, this process triggered a quiet reorientation. Actors who had previously looked to Camilla for guidance began to realign their loyalties. Attention and voting shifted to where the future was perceived to lie. This process made it clear how quickly power dynamics can shift when the institutional focus changes. Titles alone were no longer sufficient to secure influence. For Queen Camilla, this presented a twofold challenge. On the one hand, she had to cope with the loss of influence. On the other hand, she faced the question of how to redefine her role. Public reticence seemed one possible way to preserve dignity. At the same time, the pressure grew to maintain visibility in order to avoid fading completely into insignificance. This tension made her position particularly precarious. Reactions within the palace remained subdued but unambiguous. There were no open expressions of solidarity, no attempts to actively defend her position. Instead, an atmosphere prevailed that suggested adaptation to and acceptance of the new order. For many, it was clear that the decision would not be reversed. It was part of a larger strategic realignment. This development sends a strong signal to the entire system. Power within the monarchy is not static but bound to perspective. Those perceived as part of the past lose weight, regardless of formal positions. Queen Camilla thus became the first prominent figure to visibly experience this transition. However, the loss of influence raises a fundamental question. If even the queen consort can be sidelined without public explanation, what security do other actors within the court have? And does this process point to a phase in which internal stability is increasingly being replaced by clear but tough decisions? While Queen Camilla lost influence, a parallel development took place that is considered within the palace to be as quiet as it is consequential. Catherine, Princess of Wales, increasingly moved to the center of the strategic preparations for the coming regency. Without public announcement, without demonstrative gestures, and without any visible claim to power, she assumed tasks that are described internally as setting the course. The contrast to the previous dynamic was striking and deliberate. Within the planning structures, Catherine, Princess of Wales, was not perceived as a figurehead, but as a stabilizing factor. Her role developed according to a clear principle: presence without dominance, influence without theatrics. In an environment sensitive to any form of ambition, precisely this restraint proved to be an advantage. It generated trust where others provoked resistance. Observers within the court report a changed working atmosphere in the early preparatory rounds. Decisions were made more pragmatically, and priorities were set more clearly. The focus was less on symbolic self-presentation and more on connecting with a younger public. Catherine, Princess of Wales, is said to have assumed a moderating role, linking strategic considerations with social impact. This approach fits seamlessly with Prince William's style. Unlike previous power shifts within the monarchy, this rise occurred without visible friction. Catherine didn't sideline anyone. She simply filled the space created by the reorganization. While other players lost visibility, she gained relevance, not through volume but through reliability. This dynamic was quickly recognized and accepted within the palace. Particularly noteworthy is that Catherine, Princess of Wales, was not positioned as an adversary to Queen Camilla. Rather, the impression was of a generational transition in which roles were being redefined without being explicitly stated. The future of the monarchy was not defined by confrontation, but by a shift in focus. Following this logic, Catherine became the natural point of reference for everything that lay ahead of the next reign. The public perception also began to shift. Without any formal explanation, it became clear that Catherine was playing an increasingly substantive role at key events. Her appearances were no longer ornamental, but functionally integrated. This reinforced the impression that she wasn't waiting for a position, but already occupying it. Within a system that had long thrived on transitions, this was a quiet but significant break. This development had an additional effect. It strengthened Prince William's strategic position. The combination of clear boundaries and reliable partnership created an image of stability that the monarchy had recently lacked. Catherine, Princess of Wales, thus became the interface between tradition and renewal, not as a projection screen, but as an operational force. Within the palace, this process is interpreted as a conscious rebalancing. Where previously different power centers competed for attention, the structure is now consolidating around a clearly defined center. Music. This center is future-oriented, not focused on balancing past roles. Catherine embodies this orientation without explicitly proclaiming it. This subtle shift raises a crucial question. Is this form of transition the model for the future monarchy? If influence is derived less from titles than from function, This will not only change individual roles but also the self-image of the entire institution. The answer to this question could determine whether the monarchy can permanently manage the balancing act between tradition and renewal. The power struggle reached its most critical point when King Charles attempted to halt this development. It became known within the palace that there had been a direct confrontation with Princess and, not public, not recorded, but with far-reaching consequences. It was the moment when it became clear that the conflict was no longer solely about individual roles but about fundamental control over the future direction of the crown. King Charles found himself caught in a dual role. On the one hand as the reigning monarch who must maintain institutional unity. On the other hand as the husband of Queen Camilla, whose influence was visibly waning. His attempt to mediate between familial loyalty and monarchical order, however, encountered a clear limit. Princess Annette made it unequivocally clear that, in her view, the focus should not be on the present, but on the future of the monarchy. This stance marked a turning point. Within the family, it became clear that even the king no longer acted as the ultimate authority. The real power had shifted towards those who would embody the coming reign. King Charles's influence formally remained, but strategically it was increasingly limited. For many observers, this was the clearest sign that a generational change had already begun before the actual coronation. The consequences of this confrontation extended beyond the individuals involved. Within the court, a period of quiet reorientation began. Loyalties were re-evaluated, channels of communication adjusted, and priorities reset. The monarchy began to internally realign itself towards a structure in which the past carried less weight than the ability to connect with the future. The exclusion of Queen Camilla from the coronation plans thus became a symbol of a broader upheaval. Particularly explosive was the fact that this reorganization was carried out without any public explanation. Instead, the palace opted for controlled silence. Official pronouncements remained muted, and formulations were deliberately left open. But it was precisely this restraint that amplified the effect. In a system where every word is weighed, omission itself became a message. Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, increasingly stood at the center of this development. They embodied not only the next generation but also a different understanding of leadership. Less compromise, more clarity, less symbolism, more structure. This approach quickly gained support within the palace because it offered guidance in a period of increasing uncertainty. The conflict between King Charles and Princess Anne made it clear that the monarchy was at a crossroads. Either it clings to a model strongly influenced by personal relationships, or it implements a new definition in which function and future viability prevail. The current decisions clearly point to the latter. This makes Prince William's coronation more than just a ceremonial act. It becomes the visible culmination of an ongoing transfer of power. This development raises fundamental questions. How stable is a monarchy in which the reigning king loses strategic influence? What role remains for a queen consort when her presence is politically decoupled? And how sustainable is a system that doesn't resolve conflicts openly, but rather settles them through structural shifts? The monarchy is no longer in a holding pattern. The course for the future is already being set, quietly, consistently, and irreversibly. Whether this course will ensure long-term stability or create new tensions remains to be seen. But one thing is undeniable. The crown is being redefined before it is even passed on. The internal processes surrounding the preparations for Prince William's future coronation mark a profound turning point in the modern history of the monarchy. What initially appeared to be an organizational decision has revealed itself to be a strategic realignment with clear lines of power. The de facto exclusion of Queen Camilla from key planning processes made it clear that influence within the crown no longer stemmed solely from titles or proximity to the reigning monarch, but increasingly from a future-oriented perspective and institutional acceptance. At the heart of this development was Princess Anne, whose intervention marked a turning point that appeared to have been years in the making. Her stance followed a consistent principle. The stability of the future reign took precedence over existing arrangements. This course was supported by Prince William, who no longer positioned himself as a passive heir to the throne, but as an active shaper of the future. His willingness to distance himself from the existing power structure fundamentally altered the balance of power. Simultaneously, Catherine, Princess of Wales, gained in importance. Without public displays of power or overt claims to authority, she evolved into the central stabilizing figure of the new order. Her rise illustrated the transition from symbolic presence to functional influence. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla visibly lost political weight, though this process went unofficially acknowledged. This very silence amplified the impact of the decision. King Charles's attempt to slow this development revealed the limits of his strategic reach. Although he formally remains at the helm, it has become clear that the actual direction of the monarchy is already being shaped by the next generation. Prince William's coronation thus appears less as the beginning and more as the conclusion of a very long transition of power. These events raise fundamental questions. Is the monarchy facing a period of greater clarity or new internal tensions? Will the deliberate shift in influence bring long-term stability or deepen existing divisions? And how much change can an institution, whose strength traditionally stems from continuity, tolerate?